These unconventional times require unconventional conversations. Listen in as your host, Richard Gordon, engages in one-on-one conversations with numerous leaders, elected officials, politicians, and others to learn what's happening in your state, on the Hill, and across America. Now, here's the host of Unconventional Times, Richard Gordon.
This is Unconventional Times. I'm your host, Richard Gordon. Thank you for tuning in. We're coming to you live from Savannah, Georgia. And that's why this program is going to be just a little bit different than the episodes we've done in the past. We're going to be meeting with important environmental decision makers from across the country. They're all here in Savannah to talk about some of the major environmental issues of our day. They're at the Environmental Council of the States meeting, which meets twice a year, to bring these people together to discuss the major environmental issues that are affecting your lives. Forest fires, floods, tornadoes, hurricanes, major storms, super snowstorms. These are the issues that people are worried about when talking about the environment, and they affect each and every one of us every day. So we're going to take some time and sit down with the people who make decisions that affect your environment and your life. I also want to take a moment here to thank our sponsor, Appaluma. You know, people may not know this, but many years ago, I was an environmental commissioner. Yes, it's true. I was Commissioner Gordon. I still get a lot of grief for that. But, you know, when I made decisions, I had to make them almost in the dark because data was everywhere and I couldn't pull it together to understand it and understand how different pieces affected each other. Well, what Appaluma does is they take that data and they bring it to light. So data from years ago could be compared to data today. And by doing so, the people we're talking to and the people who are here at this ECOS conference, the Environmental Council of the States conference here in Savannah, what they could do is make better decisions, and better decisions make your life better. You were president of ECOS.
Yes.
Which is where we are today. We've had a number of your colleagues in to talk with us. I don't think people at home know what ECOS is. And I know when I was an environmental commissioner, there was no ECOS.
Yeah.
So I'm glad there is. Why don't you take a minute and explain what it's like being president of it and what that meant during your presidency?
Yeah. So the Environmental Council of the States, known as ECOS, is a bipartisan organization of almost every single state environmental secretary or commissioner. And we come together twice a year in person at a fall and spring meeting. And then throughout the year, we get together to talk about certain policy issues in smaller groups. And what we do is really advocate for funding from Congress to EPA, which ultimately goes to states. Importantly to note that states are mostly a pass-through agency for the funding we receive. Like in New Mexico, we put out about $170 million annually for drinking water, wastewater, supporting solid and municipal waste, composting, also energy, all sorts of things that Congress allocates money for go directly into communities. Mm-hmm. So ECOS is that organization that then has that really hard job of figuring out some of the policy pieces.
You know, it's interesting. We're at this conference at ECOS, the Environmental Council, and the subject of the meeting is economic development and the environment. I want to ask you a bunch of questions about that. So first, talk a little bit more about the economy. I mean, you know, those of us who are not from Maine, we think of two things: timber, lobsters. Okay? What's the effect?
One of the effects I think we would like to look for is maybe some diversification, so that it's not all just timber and lumber, or timber and lobster. But obviously, I mean, our lobster fishery is run off of our coastline. Right. And so when those piers and wharves and docks are all washed away, then you have nothing to bring your boats up to, no place to store your traps, to have your bait. They can't go to work until those structures are rebuilt. So we see immediate and enormous effects on the coastal waterfront. The timber industry, we're seeing declines, I think, for other reasons. We're also seeing some effects from invasive species, like some of the insects that we're seeing migrate into the state. But in some ways, on the timber side of things, some of that is, just a change in a shift from a paper-based economy to an electronically based economy.
Of course, right. Which has nothing to do with climate, obviously.
Right. But then there are opportunities associated with that. So we have paper mills that have shut down in the state of Maine that have existing electrical infrastructure, electrical generation capacity, large amounts of water that used to be sourced to those mills, wastewater treatment plants. They offer an excellent opportunity for data centers. Today, here at ECOS, we were talking a lot about siting of data centers, environmental concerns related to data centers, and some of these kind of brownfield sites where maybe the industry that they used to serve isn't the only thing that they could be focused on and be successful anymore, but maybe we can fit things like data centers in there and reuse existing infrastructure.
You brought up business quite a few times in this discussion. Talk to me, it's a theme of this conference. Talk to me about the connection between economic development and growth and the environment. How do you balance those two things off?
Yeah, I love that question. And I love when people still have a premise. Historically, those two things seem to be at odds. And now the idea that environment and the economy cannot be hand in hand, I think is just such a false choice. It's the easy way to get up from the table and not work harder. And
what do you mean by that?
well, people sort of say, like, if you're going to regulate, pick your water, air, PFAS and consumer packaging, it's not good for the economy. So we're just gonna agree we're gonna disagree and get up and walk. Well, I think what we've shown time and time again is that the economic focus of New Mexico and the environmental focus of New Mexico have landed us on Fast Company's, we're like number one on Fast Company's list of innovative economic development agencies. Mm-hmm. That happens with a good economic leader, which we have, but it also happens with the fact that we're handing out $170 million in infrastructure money on an annual basis. It happens that we're creating market incentives under our Clean Fuels program for investments to decarbonize transportation fuels. It happens that we're removing PFAS from or disclosing what PFAS is in consumer packaging so parents can make a choice as to what toys they're going to buy, what clothing they're going to buy their kids. All those things are really important because we've, through our governor's leadership, we've really focused on the health of New Mexicans and the upward prosperity of New Mexicans. And the environment pieces are complementing, are pushing those upward as well.
So talk to us a little bit about the balance between economic development and the environment, because I am sure in your job that every time a company wants to move into Maine, how do I get an air permit? How do I get a water permit? And how do you balance this off? I mean, because it is a major concern, especially as our population continues to grow and develop. We heard from Governor McMaster from South Carolina today about a farm turned into, a million homes. How do you, in your job, balance these absolutely competing interests, and how do they sit side by side?
Well, I know you've heard everybody say that they're not competing, so I won't correct you about that.
Well, you could tell us. I'd be interested to hear your take on it.
I would say that it comes down to regulatory certainty, that there are investors who look to bring their business to the state of Maine for a variety of reasons, often having to do with the resources that they would have access to, whether or not it's, our forests, our clean water. We've had aquaculture facilities, we've had oriented strand board facilities be contemplated. We have facilities now that are looking into waste management, which we want to encourage to come into the state. And what I hear over and over again from companies that are looking to invest in Maine is not that they're not looking for the standards to be lax. They don't want us to go easy on them. In many cases, they are associated with companies that have a national and international presence. And so they have a sustainability ethic associated with the company. So they want to come to a state where they can say to their investors that what they're doing is a good thing for the environment. They're not having harm, but they want to know what they have to do. And they don't want what they have to do to change. So when they are planning to make a massive investment, that takes an enormous amount of time, right? So you come up with an idea, you pick a potential site, or you start scouting sites, you start soliciting investors. you're already investing money in all of those activities. And so now you start to have some sunk costs. Then you hire, let's say, a local consultant to look into the environmental regulations. And that person starts to advise you about, your potential site selections and which ones might be a good fit based on those environmental standards that they're looking at. The worst thing that can happen for an investor is they get through all of that, they do site selection, and they get into the permitting process, and then we move the goalposts on them. So they don't come in asking for us to make it easy for them. What they want is for us to be very clear about what they're required to do, so that when they start doing those budget sheets and they start figuring out how much money they're going to need in order to construct, that what they're looking at to do those calculations on the first day is going to be the same as what it's going to be 2 years later when they're starting to put out to bid those contracts. Now, there's economic changes that obviously we can't control for, but we need to be really careful about not moving those goalposts on them on the environmental standard side, so that they can feel confident that when they talk to us at the beginning and start to plan to meet the requirements that we're setting forth for them, that when they do those things, that's going to give them a yes on the permit when the time comes at the end of that stage.
There's been a lot of talk about AI, and I know we don't have a heck of a lot of time, but just tell me how you're using it and where it's going and what you see the future of it in New Mexico.
Yeah, let me consult AI for that answer.
That's a great idea.
The reality is from the records we have, we're one of the most IPRA agencies in state government.
And IPRA, just so people who aren't from there know, is basically the Freedom of Information Act.
Yep, exactly. So I think last year we averaged about 3 or 4 per day. Which
costs a fortune.
Cost a fortune, is a ton of time, and taking all of our data, all of our records, and running them through, turning them into digitizing them, and then having AI be able to search them and kind of compile and answer questions is not only good government, but it's a degree of transparency that has never happened before.
There's been all these discussions today about that. And as we talked about, permitting holds business up. How could you use AI better for permitting, let's say?
Yes. Well, we are certainly hoping that we're going to. There is actually many initiatives in the governor's current supplemental budget that include investments in AI and training in AI. And so one of the things that we've been looking at is we have a new online licensing system that we're working to integrate our licensing programs into. And that will include, it has all the templates for our licensing decision. So it can sort of generate a templated one, plug in all the information. And so what we're hoping to do over time is to integrate AI into that system. And so ultimately, if all goes well, it would do a lot of the analysis that right now our staff do,
right.
And then would give them sort of suggested outcomes from that. But this application lacks this thing, or this application needs more information on that, or it doesn't meet the standard or that standard, and that our staff would still need to truth check that, but not have to do that same level of in-depth analysis, because they would be able to use the AI tools to do that for them. So, I mean, my hope is now that we've, for us, it was a huge modernization, still is, to move into this new online system.
Right.
And then that gives us the platform from which we can then integrate AI and be able to do things smarter and faster.
The federal government has severely cut back the EPA to the tune of billions of dollars. They've lost 55% of their budget. They've lost at least 2,000 employees. How does it affect you as a secretary? How does it affect you in doing your job?
I would say let's not worry about how it affects me. Let's worry about how it affects everyday New Mexicans. And New Mexicans have an expectation, as they should, that they are going to have safe and reliable drinking water. Mm-hmm. That when they are in need of testing for, let's say, a forever chemical like PFAS in their private well water, that they can turn to somebody who can do that for them and help them through those times. So we often are that intermediary that's doing the frontline work. States do frontline work. We are in communities every day doing that work. And so if we can't get money from the feds because somebody has retired, or because somebody has been laid off, or the budget doesn't support that program anymore, then we as states are stuck between the community who needs assistance and a federal government that can't provide it. And that becomes effectively a ward of the legislature. So we have to go back to our state legislature and say, hey, we don't have money here.
And hope they give it to you?
And hope they give it to you. And now New Mexico taxpayers are paying more. It's a tough sell, but it's the reality of the time we're in.
How do you run an agency? How do you know who to hire? How do you know what programs you could do if you don't know what dollars are coming out of Washington for you? How do you handle that?
Sure. Well, I'd say for future reference, for anybody who's planning a state government environmental agency's budget, that my advice would be that you don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Okay.
So you should never become overly dependent on any funding source, for one. So we rely on federal funding, we have state funding, and then we have funding from fees. So licensing fees, pollution fees, et cetera. And so generally try to have it be a third, because going back to that pendulum swinging on, any given year, it could be that there's lots of federal money to be had, but we have a state situation where we need to drastically cut our state funding. And so the same situation that happened to us and to EPA at the federal level can just as easily happen at the state level any given time.
What is the one thing that you want to tell somebody? The thing you're proudest of, or the thing that you want them to copy?
I think environmental agencies have not historically been good at telling their story, and they need to, tell their story in ways. They need to tell their story in ways that resonate with people, not with necessarily their leadership. Mm-hmm. Of course, you want your governor, your congressional delegation, your legislature to understand what you're doing, but you really do need, the soccer mom or the tribal leader or the person on the street to just really know what the environment department, what your environmental agency is doing for them. On average, dollar per employee, about $215,000 is given out for every employee I have. So when I throw that up to the $140 million annually, you can see that the more people we have, the more money we're getting out to communities. And, those are the kinds of things that I think environmental leaders really need to be more nimble about storytelling and making it relevant. That I think that's probably my first answer that comes to mind.
In today's world, that's groundbreaking.
I think we've been, at least in the last several years, remarkably successful in, we might be known for it a little bit in Maine. We're a bit blunt. We can be very straightforward, and to apply that fairly across the board to everyone, regardless of political party, and that where the department tries to operate in a really objective, transparent, and straightforward way. And then, we leave it up to some of the decision makers like the legislature to decide what to do with that. Mm-hmm. But we get as much good information out there as we can so that they're armed with good information to help them make those decisions. So to be part of trying to support good decision making, regardless of who's the one making the decision.
This is Richard Gordon with Unconventional Times. We just concluded a couple of really exciting days here in Savannah, Georgia at the Environmental Council of the States meeting. What was really interesting for me was having the opportunity to sit down with environmental leaders from across the country and ask them questions about how they're dealing with some of the toughest issues that anyone is confronting at this time. The environment is a presence in everybody's life with everything we do. And to have the opportunity to sit down with people who are on the front lines, who are making the decisions that affect your everyday life was something I found very interesting, and I think, I hope you did it as well. Let me thank you for listening or watching. It's greatly appreciated. We'll have more shows coming up soon, and I hope you'll tune in when we do. So, Richard Gordon for Unconventional Times, reminding you, stay unconventional.
You've been listening to Unconventional Times with your host, Richard Gordon. Check out all of the episodes of Unconventional Times on Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. To learn more about Richard Gordon and all of his unconventional conversations, head on over to unconventionaltimes.com. Thanks for listening.